Hello, everybody, and to all my friends here in America, happy 4th of July weekend. Our nation's birthday is tomorrow. We are joined today again by Martin Witkowski, the finest import from Poland in the history of the world, and of course Joe Cardinal. And welcome, guys. Hope they have a lot to talk about. So today is kind of a bittersweet for me because it was 5 years ago this weekend, 4th of July weekend, that my friend Kevin, the best, got killed in a plane crash, which ergo caused the loss of my gym. And he actually technically died July 1st. So this is always for me going to be a bittersweet, just as Christmas is bittersweet for me. Losing my father around Christmas, my grandmother, my dog, holidays, it just seems for me are not the best. But anyway, I don't see Martin. I know he's on, but I can't see his face. But nobody cares about that because we got Joe Cardinal's face, and that's why everybody tunes in. Joe, what's up?
Hey, what's going on? I heard you had a big seminar recently.
Yeah, and let's talk about that a moment before I kind of turn it over to you guys to talk about your happy wandering. The seminar was a great success at North Central College in Naperville. And the good news is that I've got a gig now there once a month, every third Sunday of the month. And if something should happen, we have an alternate location. And what it's going to be now is a compendium where I can finally again do my thing and teach a structured seminar or not a seminar so much as a continuing education on learning as much as my system as possible, total complete system, and hopefully this will continue on and on and on for forever. And I'm hoping to also score 1 or 2 more seminars per month, either through this with these group or maybe at Josh Bassini's place or Jason Bender's place, or maybe another gym in the Chicagoland area. That would be terrific. So it's going to be every third Sunday of the month. Starts at 10 a.m. So Joe will put again the address, and I would suggest contacting Chuck May, as he's the man that is behind this. And I met a couple of wonderful police officers there. One may be stopping at my house later today. And there were lay people as well, civilians. A lady was present too. So this is open for everybody. This is not just relegated to these people. We're trying to get as many signups as we can. It's in a gigantic North Central College wrestling room. You can look it up on the internet, and you can see they've had some All-Americans out of there. No air conditioning. It's a wrestling room, so it'll be fun in the winter though. But yeah, it's warm, but it's a nice facility. Ample parking for everyone, free parking. And yeah, just a hell of a good group, a big variety of people. And I'm hoping for bigger turnouts every week, every month. And yeah, so you missed out. You and Martin, you both were traveling, and let's hear all about it. I don't know which one of you guys wants to go first. It's all about you, Joe, always. So
True. I mean, that's what everybody wants to hear, but I don't want to Martin would be a tough act to follow. So But before I go on, I just want to kind of mention that. So you mentioned Chuck May's name, but that's through DuPage Krav Maga. So you can also look up the DuPage Krav Maga. They may have something on their website as well. Like I said, I'll put what links we get down below.
Yeah, and ultimately, if there would ever be a confliction with North Central College, we will use the Krav Maga facility. But that's just minor details. But yeah, anyway, yeah. So thanks. But we got to hear about you and your wilderness or wherever the hell you went.
Yeah, well, so last summer we did a podcast when I went with my buddy Dwayne to the Tom Brown Tracker School in New Jersey. And so I went back. So they have kind of like a main line of courses. They have different what do you call it, like areas of study but their core curriculum, they have two primitive survival skills classes, which Dwayne and I did last year. And now this year I'm doing two more classes, but they're not back to back. So I'll actually be heading back there next weekend, which is in some ways kind of a relief because for this next one, I'm going to need to be rested up a little bit. But this previous week, so the way that they structure their core curriculum, you have 2 weeks of primitive survival skills. So you're doing like, we talked about this a little bit, but it was like, building shelters, building fires, finding water, things like that. They delve into a lot more. Again, one of kind of the things that this school is known for is tracking. Tom Brown he's like since the 70s, he's been one of the big guys in tracking nationwide and has trained a bunch of trackers. So each class, they'll give you a little bit of tracking skills and kind of introduce you to the different patterns that animals make and the different, things you'll see in footsteps. But this week was a focus on tracking. So you spent a lot of time kind of being guided by their top instructors on seeing tracks in very difficult terrain. So in this one, it was a lot less survival skill oriented, although they kind of, make the case that tracking is definitely a part of your survival skills. So if you're going to, lay animal traps or hunt or do things for food, you've got to kind of understand and be tuned in to what the animal movement is in your area. And so that's a big part of it. But they're also kind of, they're kind of training people to be naturalists, if you will, to be more, you're using these skills first, obviously foremost, just to be able to survive. But also, these things, their ethic is that you're kind of getting closer to nature too, which is just inevitable. If you're learning what these different trees are, what these different animals are, you're becoming more in tune with the natural environment around you, which is, a big bonus for, even like you yourself, Tony, you're a city boy, but now that you kind of appreciate, you've got kind of the rural lifestyle going where you like being out on your porch and just anything like even small things like we spent a lot of time. They had an expert there. This was kind of a big bonus for me. There was a guy. So one of Tom Brown's first students was a guy named John Young. And it's one of the things that's kind of very interesting about all these different people who've trained with Tom is that they'll focus on different aspects because there's so many different dimensions to outdoor skills. So if people go back in our podcast, we had Joe Lau on. You probably remember him. He was a guy who took it and focused specifically on friction fire. And his whole thing is, all over the world, what are the different primitive ways of making fire and what different woods does it work with? And, what temperature conditions and all kinds of other things. And so he's really made that his life works to kind of preserve that and disseminate that knowledge. We've had guys who focus in on like primitive cooking. Maybe they had a background before they came to the school of being a chef. And then they said, well, let me figure out how this would work in a primitive scenario. But anyways, John Young, the thing he's probably most famous for, and he was, believe he was Tom's very first student, is bird language, something that he calls. And it's really learning about bird calls and paying attention to the birds and the pattern of bird calls in your environment and staying tuned into that. I think we've all seen things, the idea that you can tell when an animal's alarming, as opposed to doing its bird song, and that may indicate something's up in your environment, whether it's, a stray cat or a fox on the prowl, but there is a whole pattern. There's kind of a flow throughout the day. And it's very true. I think most people will notice that before the sun rises, there's a large peak of bird sounds. So you'll see all like, right now the sun's coming up pretty early in my, so it's like about 5:20 or so in the morning, the sun is actually rising. So right at about 4 in the morning or so, you'll start to hear the bird noise get really loud. And there's a reason for that. The reason why they kind of time it for that is that they do all their activity in the morning and it kind of shuts off. It never completely quiets down. There's all kinds of little chatter, but the big cacophony of bird sound happens then, and it drops off because once the sun is up, then all the predatory birds can see clearly. They can navigate through the branches once the sun is up and things. And so now they have to start changing their behavior. And so, I mean, I'm kind of going in depth about this, but it was really fascinating to me learning about this and kind of paying attention to the cycle of bird and animal noises in your environment and trying to tune into that. And just there are certain birds that you'll see sitting at the top of trees or, maybe on light poles, and they're actually playing a role of sentinel, and they're keeping an eye out for Cooper's hawks. Usually in North America, I think the main predator for songbirds is Cooper hawks. And it's just really fascinating talking about how their behavior works and what you can kind of pick up from that. So again, a big focus of this week was what they call tracking and awareness. So they want you to work on your tracking skills, which is kind of a form of awareness of your environment, but also other skills like listening to the natural environment around you and things of that nature. No pun intended. So yeah, it was cool. We had people from all over the world again at the class. There was probably about 50 of us. My group was primarily made up of people from Germany, and they were super cool, super into it. A lot of them had been there for 3 weeks straight because they usually put the survival classes first, and then they run this one as the third week. Last year, Dwayne and I only did 2 weeks, so we didn't stay for that third week. So I went back and knocked that out. We also did some really cool, what I'd call almost like nature games at night, things that would involve almost kind of like capture the flag and camouflage type things, just kind of going out. And I've actually posted a picture of myself on Instagram, camoed up with mud, charcoal, and sawdust and things like that. So, I mean, it is kind of like summer camp for adults in a lot of ways, but a lot of like high-end lectures, and you learn a lot of things. So, anyways, that's just kind of like an overview of what happened that week. So it was a great
Hey, Joe,
time.
I have one question about that. So you say this is in New Jersey, and like, when I think of New Jersey, I don't really think wilderness. Can you give us a little bit of a understanding of what the wilderness that you get deployed into really looks like what type of terrain it is? Because in New Jersey, I think Newark and like basically urban jungle.
Yeah, it is not Camden. No, exactly. It's funny. Whenever I tell people, oh yeah, I'm going to an outdoor school, survival skills, and they're like, oh, where are you going? They think it's some national park or something. Oh no, I'm going to New Jersey, and everybody does a double take. No one associates that with outdoor, but I mean, every state has some. And like in this case, it's the Pine Barrens National Forest there in New Jersey, where they have, I don't know how many acres they have, but basically when you get off the main road, you spend at least 20 minutes driving into this wooded area, that unpaved rough road. So you're bouncing up and down in these vans and trucks to get in there, and you're very deep into the forest at that point. And it's definitely a pine forest with kind of almost like the soil is almost sandy. There's an area there that's swamp. There's a cedar swamp that's not too far from there. That's really gorgeous. So it is funny that in the midst of all kind of what you'd consider like urban decay, kind of what the cliche of what everybody thinks New Jersey is kind of this epicenter for natural training. So, but yeah, so you're deep in the woods, pines, yeah, and you're kind of just camping out in that area where they kind of set up a school in the midst of there.
How long are you going to be gone this next time?
Another week. So this next week is considered their scout training. So I imagine this is going to be a lot more like, late at night, capture the flag games, camouflaging, things like that, stalking through the woods. So it should be a lot of fun. It's something
Well, then maybe Martin and I can do the podcast together next weekend, because we can't, we got to. Yeah. All right.
I know.
Good.
Yeah, I know the fans are always,
Yeah. Well,
yearning
next time
for
you're
something.
there, next coming week, ask Tom Brown or whatever if he trained Mike Hanak. Okay.
Mike Hanak. Okay.
Yeah, because I've talked about them with everybody that's been on the show from your escapades, and so yeah, ask because I don't know who the hell Mike Kanak trained with. I thought he told me it was somebody out west,
Hmm.
but I
Well,
could.
and they did run schools out west for a while too. So they used to have both coasts. So they
Well,
originated
but
in
I
New
could be
Jersey.
wrong. But just ask
Yeah,
because
sure,
you
sure.
can't. My memory. This is 20 years ago, so I can't recall shit.
Hmm. But I wouldn't surprise me yet because he's been kind of like, at least he's got to be aware of Tom Brown. But anyways, yeah. So that was my week in the woods.
Well, I think Martin has a great, interesting little vacation. So why don't you tell us about your trip, Martino?
Yeah, I went with my family back to Poland probably for the first time since COVID. I used to go pretty regularly every year or so because it's kind of an easy trip for me. I know the language, I get around, I usually stay at like a verbal with the family, so we buy groceries and we cut down the cost that way. Um, so this was the first time I went since 2019, and I went with my kids and with their grandparents, my parents. And like one of the observations that I was telling Tony about is that inflation is really everywhere. Like prices have gone up over there too. And this is, boots on the ground observation because, like I said, I go to grocery stores and I don't just stay at hotels, and prices at hotels might move at a different rate than prices, at a local Aldi or whatever you got. So the inflation is a global problem, and people are very attuned to it over there too. Everywhere you go, there is signs saying, we're fighting inflation prices. This is this kind of a price and that kind of a price. So this is like a topic that's hotly contested everywhere. I don't know what the answer is. I mean, the reality is that inflation affects everybody, and I feel like the prices have just gone up all over the world. Just to give you like an example, like I usually look at stuff based on like price of beer or something like that, and that effectively doubled since the last time I was there. So it's up. Uh, and the other observation I had was like air travel is a major pain in the ass nowadays. Maybe I don't know how Joe got to New Jersey, whether he flew or drove, but air travel, international or domestic, is just a mess. It is fundamentally understaffed, underfunded, I suppose, and generally difficult to get through. And I think one of the fears that everybody has is that with the pressure to push through so many passengers, some of the safety regulations will become more lax and there will be, disasters because air travel is fraud. I mean, Tony, maybe you can talk about this, but the plane crash that you mentioned that involved your friend Kevin, that's a slightly different beast because it's a private airplane, but it made the news when it happened. It was all over the news here in Chicago, and it was weather related, and from what I remember,
Yeah.
and in the commercial setting, weather is also driving a lot of this stuff. Like they'll cancel flights and they'll delay things and so forth. But there is like a fear that with enough pressure, some of these safety regulations will be overlooked and bad things will happen. So, I don't recommend travel to people if they can avoid it, just because if it's crowded, it means that maybe there isn't as many eyes on the ball as there should be.
Well, one of the and this is it kind of ties into what you just said, but I've said this for years and years. There's so much beauty around where you live. Okay. Now I don't mean like 3 blocks away, but within, there used to be a TV show in Cleveland when I was a kid on the news, and it was by I don't know if you wouldn't want to call him a newscaster, but hired by the news. Neil Zerker was his name. I don't know if he's still alive, but he had this segment called One Tank Trips. Okay. Well, while Cleveland gets a lot of bad reputation and the mistake by the lake and all of that, Cleveland is really known as the best location in the nation. That is really a very apropos nickname, because Cleveland is literally in such a beautiful spot that within one day you can get so many places, right? Niagara Falls, New York City, Philadelphia, Atlantic City, Washington, D.C., you know, blah, 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 Chicago, whatever. And I told people there's so much around you that you're not even aware of. For example, living here, the majority of folks have never been to Chicago. They know nothing about it. Well, what they think they know is, you know, totally misconstrued. So even my friend Scott was to Chicago maybe a couple times before he got to know me. Now I've taken him to Chicago. We fell in love with it. So yeah, I think at times it would behoove people to just, wherever they live, draw a circle, like put your city in the center and draw like 100-mile or 150-mile radius, and just pick out spots to go. You'd be probably surprised at how much fun and how much interesting things you can find. But yeah, I don't like traveling by air, just because since 9/11, it's been a hassle with the TSA and taking your shoes off and all of that kind of jazz. And since Kevin's plane crash, I don't care if I ever fly again. I don't really want to fly again. We had flown to Cleveland a couple months, April, June, yeah, so like 3 months, 2.5 months before his crash. I was the last successful flight, as you want to say, and we caught some weather going into Cleveland over Lake Erie, and we had to try to beat the weather coming back, because we flew there and flew back the same day. This was when Kevin was looking to get a GT40 built, which is a high performance car, replica car, but he had a 1150 horsepower motor he was going to put in it. Oh my God. Anyway, I really don't have a reason to fly. And of course, with my mother, when I was taking care of my mother, I couldn't go anywhere. Now, I mean, I'm in essence free to travel. If I would go for a business, like if it were to teach a seminar, if they're going to fly me out and pay me substantially, I'll do it. But leisurely, I'm just content, going to the city, going to Chicago, or taking another road trip to Cleveland.
To your point, it kind of goes
Yeah,
back to, oh, go ahead. I'll just say,
sorry,
like,
no, I was gonna say, like, the rest of my summer is basically going to be road trips because of how much of a hassle it is. And just to sum up what I was saying about the weather, like, to your point, Tony, like with a private plane, you try to beat the weather. With larger flights, they will do cancellations and they will, postpone flights because of the weather. It's not because it's completely unsafe or impossible to do, but because it takes longer for them to process the planes on the ground because of bad weather. But there is a safety aspect involved in all of that, and I always wonder about the pressure that these airlines will put on their workers to process all these flights and have less cancellations. What they do right now is it's an interesting phenomenon. Is they do what they call hate pricing. Is they'll make the tickets so expensive as to discourage more passengers, and they'll still make a bigger profit because of that. But it's not impossible to see a situation where they would sacrifice some of the safety aspects in order to meet their goals. And I don't want to be in that situation. I'd rather do road trips, like Tony was saying, and there is plenty to see.
Well, on that note about the weather, so if there's any people who are into aviation, I want to clarify a few things here. When I first met Kevin, he had a Cherokee Aero single engine. From there, he graduated to a 310 and then a 401. And finally, he had a 421C, Cessna 421C. It's a pretty big private plane, twin engine, 8-seater, had a what they call a potty in it, like a little toilet, all of that. And yeah, they were flying out of Waukegan where he kept his airplane, and they were heading to Winnipeg for a fishing week-long fishing trip. And yeah, there was weather. There appeared to be a break in the weather. Now I've flown everywhere with Kevin, so we've done this countless times. But apparently, what happened was there was a microburst, and that sheared off the tail of the airplane. And as I was told, quote, it came down like a lawn dart. Subsequently, I've talked to very experienced airline pilots, and they all say, hey, you fly as a pilot, you fly into a thunderstorm once, okay? Meaning you either never make it out of it or you learn, don't fly in a thunderstorm. It's different with airlines, of course, because the planes are, bigger, a little more viable, but the negative is they can't just set down wherever they want to set down when you're in a large jet. But I still don't know the exact details. Apparently there was loss of radio communication, and he went down in a small town called Phillips, Wisconsin. Matter of fact, they had to do the autopsy, I believe, in Minneapolis. Definitely was Minnesota, but so they were closer to, they were heading up north. But when you're in the middle of the night and you can't see and you don't know, we almost went down. We almost lost it, Kevin and I, coming out of Mena, Arkansas. And we flew, this is back before he was instrument rated. We flew smack dab into a thunderstorm, and we were in the mountains, and I'm just lucky to be here. We thought for sure we were going down. We said our goodbyes to each other. So yeah, weather is you don't want to, you can't beat Mother Nature. It's just not worth it. And I'll wrap it up by saying I was on a commercial airliner coming back from a seminar, and the wing got struck by lightning, and it literally sounded like a bomb went off. Okay. I mean, it shook everybody on the plane, and whoever was sitting next to me was some lady. She just started crying and holding on to me like she was my wife. She was a total stranger, but she was scared shitless. She was in the middle seat. I was on the I always like to get the aisle seat because I'm a little bigger, so I can stretch out some. But yeah, when you go through that, and like I said with Kevin, I've been through tornadoes. I have a picture somewhere, a snapshot of a what do you call it? A funnel cloud. I mean, it kind of changes your perspective on flying, especially in bad weather. I'll take a pass.
Yeah, I got burned one time recently coming home on an airplane. I didn't do it for this recent trip, but I had, I think, something like a 6 or 7 a.m. flight, some god awful early time, just to save some money. And I was there 2 hours early, and the security line was so long, it stretched around the entire airport. This is in Colorado. It took us at least 90 minutes to get through that thing, probably more. And I ended up going through, and I ended up getting, I believe, either 5 or 10 minutes early to my gate, but they had already closed the door. See, I don't travel frequent enough. Probably people listening understand the mistake I made if they fly frequently. But apparently they told me that once everybody's boarded, like the 5 minutes before is when they close the door, and that's when you're supposed to be there. And I was really upset. I'm like, your ticket said, whatever, 6:50. I'm here at 6:45. And they're like, no, we closed everything down. Technically, you're late. So literally, and I remember not running to the spot because I'm like, oh, I got time, and it just really messed me up. But it was really frustrating. There's just so many things. And I know they got their protocols, and they have to do what they have to do to keep things on time. But it is often a big pain to fly, for sure. And yeah, now it's just ridiculous with the cost of jet fuel and everything. There's no cheap tickets out there. So yeah, I definitely encourage car trips whenever you can. And kind of to the earlier point about where Martin was saying, like, what nature is there in New Jersey? It was the same thing with people's impression of Cleveland. But you're not too far from the Cuyahoga National Park, which is beautiful. I've been through there. And even like there's little strips of nature throughout. Like I think there's that really beautiful, is it Martin Luther King Drive?
Yeah, it used to be Liberty Boulevard when I was a kid. It's Martin Luther King since the 80s, I think.
but gorgeous tree lined, I mean, we
Yeah.
drove through that a couple of times and it is. So people, obviously it's just like anything. When you get your impression from, media sources, it's going to be filtered to whatever sells or whatever. But then, you got to be careful because, yeah, there's a lot of beautiful places in and around the Cleveland
Garden
area.
State. I've been to Jersey many times. It's the Garden State is beautiful. I mean, America's a large country. Okay. I remember a few years ago, the Europeans were like, you know, only 20% of Americans have passports or this or that or whatever. They don't get it. You need a passport in Europe to go 100 miles sometimes, right? Depending on where you live in your country. We don't. We have there's a lot of natural beauty in America. I mean, by far, but I try to tell people that Chicago is a destination for world travelers. And like many of the students that come from my Tri-C program, they want to take in the sights of Chicago because it's a world-class city. And I find it appalling that you have people that live just this close to the city. I'm about an hour and a half, 2 hours, depending on where you want to go from Chicago, that just are dead set against going to the city. Makes no sense to me. Everybody, I guess I get it, to each his own, but Chicago, is a world-class city. It's absolutely beautiful. Cleveland's beautiful in a different way. It's not as dense. It used to be more densely populated than Chicago because the square miles of the city proper is smaller, but the metropolitan area of Cleveland is, akin to Chicago. Chicago's got the better downtown. That's the main thing about Chicago is their beautiful skyline. I believe it's the best in the world. Where New York is awesome, but Chicago is very beautiful. But Cleveland has more of a natural beauty, more nature oriented. Part of that, what you're talking about, Martin Luther King Boulevard, that was all donated over a century ago by John D. Rockefeller, the richest man of all time. That was Rockefeller Park. He donated all that land all the way up to Lake Erie. So that's a lot of people don't realize that. Rockefeller may have been born in New York State, but he lived and made his billions, whatever, in Ohio, outside, right, Cleveland, basically. So, and Cleveland is just all of Ohio. Let me explain something. The problem with Chicago, parts of Wisconsin, Indiana, all this, Iowa, it's flat. Whereas Cleveland, now, I'm not being a stickler here, but the eastern edge of Cleveland is where the glaciers finally stopped. So you start to get hills. The closer you get to Youngstown, Pennsylvania border, the more hills. Once you get into Pennsylvania with the Allegheny Mountains, it's stunning. Okay. That's where that area outside of Pittsburgh is where my dad was from, and family and shit. Coal miners. So when you get to the Pennsylvania, West Virginia border over there, oh man, it's really marvelous. And so Ohio, or northeast Ohio, which is the Cleveland area, that's where the glaciers predominantly stop, that East Coast swoop of the glaciers. So yeah, it's really nice. And even though Cleveland is geographically Midwest, at least my little crew growing up, we were more East Coast. All of our rivalries were East Coast. We didn't have a rivalry with Chicago. Everything was New York, Pittsburgh Steelers. We paid our tribute to the mob, to the New York mob. It wasn't to the Chicago outfit. So everything, was always, it seemed, New York or East Coast based. But yeah, I wouldn't mind going back to Cleveland again. Matter of fact, I really would like to talk Scott because he's got a new car now, a beautiful 2015 Buick Enclave. Awesome. That would be a nice car to take to Cleveland, So yeah, but everybody has their own tastes. Some like the wide open, like Wyoming, Colorado, Utah stuff. I'm not a mountain guy, okay? When I went to Boulder to film the Snap No Tap, we looked at the mountains. By day 2, I'm like, okay, They haven't changed since 2 days ago. So yeah, I'm weird, but I'm not a nature guy like you are, Joe. I'm really not. I'm more urban, and I get the beauty out of the man-made creations. That's what I think is just super extraordinary. And I don't mean just skyscrapers, everybody. I'm talking about how neighborhoods are laid out, how they're manicured in landscape, like you were talking about Martin Luther King Boulevard. Man, that to me is like breathtaking.
You know, it's funny you mentioned that because I always have trouble reconciling those impulses with myself, but I realize I don't have to because I very much dig urban environments. Like I love just seeing the differences, like the slight differences about how neighborhoods, I mean, North American, especially like East Coast cities, you know, Midwest and East Coast cities, there's a similarity to them that's familiar, but each one has a different little bit of flavor, you know, and I love seeing that. I mean, just like kind of like, you know, in Chicago, the standard house is kind of the brick bungalow and or no, the two flat. And there's just kind of a look and feel to those bricks that is different than anywhere else. Or like in Cleveland, you guys have those two flats where they have like the
Frame.
porches on front, you
Yeah,
know, the
frame
frame. And so it's each city is familiar in a way because it's an American city, but each one's a little bit different. And it's always kind of fun to explore it and see those. And, you know, kind of mentioning the mix of urban and nature, Pittsburgh also, everybody thinks of the Steelers and, you know, us being a steel town, but a lot of times that's what I found. That's kind of where I stay over on my way to New Jersey when I drive, because it's just about 8 hours there and then another 6 or so to the camp in New Jersey. That's a beautiful town too, man. They've got a lot of beautiful nature there. And like a lot of times I've been able to get like Airbnb, you know, to save some money. I'll get a room on the south, I think it's called the South Flats or whatever on there, but it's beautiful. It kind of vaguely reminds me, it's this weird, Pittsburgh is this hybrid of like, it's the main downtown is kind of on like a mini Manhattan Island, like if you will, between the rivers. And then either side of it, because of the hills and the mountains, it starts to look a little bit like what reminds me of the San Francisco area, you know, but it's very beautiful, lots of trees, very green, you know. Yeah, I every time I've gone, I've liked it and just wanted to just go. I wish I had like a week or something just to go and be, you know, knew someone who lived there could take me around to the neighborhoods. You know, that was the one advantage of going with you to Cleveland. You could take me around to be like, this is what we need to go see, you know, because when you're a tourist, they kind of, you know, the guides and stuff you'll find online or in the books will kind of take you to what they assume, you know, are, you know, the tourist traps or kind of the major historic, but it's the character of the neighborhoods that you get a feel for the city. And it's extra special when you can travel for something like that and really get to get a feel for the place. But I'm absolutely with you that urban environments can be just as exciting to check out. And I definitely do it. Milwaukee's another one. That's just in striking distance of Chicago. And they've got a beautiful lakefront, which is maybe even more green than Chicago's. I think they let a lot of more nature closer to the lakefront, where we kind of build our buildings right up to the lakefront. And then we just have some beaches and a couple parks.
Well, if you just want the lake itself, go to Kenosha, because there's nobody there. They got the lighthouse. I mean, you could just sit at the lake and kind of like be on your own. But getting into Pittsburgh again, if you're driving through Pittsburgh and you have a little bit of time, take about the 45 minutes or an hour it would take. I don't know exactly. Go to Cannonsburg, okay? Famous home of Perry Como, but Cannonsburg is beautiful, okay? I had a cousin that lived there at one point. And you talk about there's houses built in the hills and all of that shit. It's really another little small area. And then of course, my dad lived the last big portion of his life in Washington, Pennsylvania, which again is south of Pittsburgh, but he was from a coal mining town, a little bit north or south of Pittsburgh, but I think northeast of Washington, PA, you know, Clarksville, Fredericksburg, or Frederickstown, all of that. And my grandfather lived in my on my dad's side lived in Latrobe, which was at the time home of Rolling Rock beer, whatever. But yeah, beautiful areas through there, man. Mariana, that's the area that basically where my dad was raised. And Martin, I'm sure that they have, you know, tell us about the urban talk urban about Poland, maybe Warsaw or, Poznan or wherever you know.
Yeah, well, I'm also like a city kid, like you, Tony, and I grew up in urban environments. But a lot of the towns in Poland have been, frankly, beat to shit by World War II.
Uh,
So a lot of the architecture has been destroyed through war. So on this trip, I've been to Gdańsk, which has been rebuilt. So what you see looking like old town is really not old town anymore. It's been rebuilt. Same with Warsaw. There's a few towns that were spared because the Nazis just took over so quickly that there was no real fighting there. Like Krakow is kind of more intact, and you'll see a little more um, like architecturally more interesting stuff. But like where I grew up, it was very much a communist project and very uninteresting, dirty, ugly. So for me, looking at some of the stuff in Chicago, it's very beautiful. And like one of the things that people always uh, associate with Chicago is crime, and the crime happens in neighborhoods that are not necessarily historically poor neighborhoods. Like the near West Side, which is where a lot of the gang-related shootings happen, you can see it off the highway that there is some really beautiful houses, and you can see like older ladies in their house coats with their hats tending to their gardens. They have like nice houses with beautiful facades and gardens that are the working class gardens, but they're pretty. And it's just a shame that all that stuff is kind of being overshadowed by all the violence and the shootings, the gun crimes.
well, let me discuss that briefly because I think today people are doing a little bit of revisionist history. Uh, the FBI kept pretty good crime stats. The 70s were a horrible time. Okay, nothing that's happening now can compare to what it was like in the 70s. Be that as it may, yes, crime is on the rise, and something needs to be done. Uh, my opinion on the matter doesn't matter. Okay, so, but you still, like you mentioned, war. Poland and so much of Europe had to deal with bombings and things that America, knock wood, has never had to deal with. So people here have to kind of keep everything in perspective. Uh, I don't live in fear of that. I mean, I lived through it in Cleveland. Never expected to live through it, to be frank with you. Uh, so now, I mean, I'm not going to shelter. I mean, I'm just that type of guy. I'm not going to shelter in. Uh, I still believe that Chicago overall is a very safe city. Uh, and when you really look at it, Martin and Joe, there's crime everywhere. It's just Chicago is on the news because it's the third largest city in the country. But statistically, it's one of the safer cities. It just doesn't stack up to other communities across the country, down south or wherever it may be. But there's crime in the rural areas. There's drug abuse. There's, sexual crimes or domestic violence crimes. Some of it doesn't even get reported. So I just believe you have to be prepared for the worst, but go out there, go out and enjoy, explore. That's just my take on it.
Yeah, Chicago crime has been spectacular, which is part of the reason why you hear about it. Like, it's not boring overdose or drug deals gone bad. It's shootings that involve 5 to 6 people. And like I'm going to be avoiding crowds because I'm going to go to fireworks tonight with my kids, but I'm going to go to a suburb because I don't know what the hell's going to happen in the Chicago fireworks. That's a crowd. That's a kind of an explosive situation. And I don't. Maybe if I was by myself, I'd chance it, but I don't want to keep an eye on my kids in an environment that's inherently kind of a powder keg.
Well, look, you have the school shootings, you have the church shootings, you have the mall shootings, et cetera, et cetera. And many, many times these are happening in small communities, not always exclusively, but you know, it happens. And the bottom line is there's some wackadoo that's behind it. Okay. There's a gunman, or maybe there's more than one. But when you have a city, the third largest in the country, as Chicago, just sheer numbers are going to tell you that, okay, there's going to be more crime here. And I think sociologists or criminologists have to get to the root of not just Chicago's crime problem, but crime problems, period. There's always a correlating factor. There's similarities in certain things. And I'm not paid to come up with these answers, nor maybe I couldn't even if I was. But yeah, changes do have to be made, but changes have to come also from us, from citizens, just like we had to make changes during World War II here. Europeans had to make changes during World War II or other wars, like what's going on in Ukraine right now. So sometimes we have to be proactive. Now, proactive doesn't mean go out shooting people. That's not where I'm leading with this. But we have to be open-minded and have a rapport going with community leaders or whoever is relegated to coming up with solutions. And us citizens have to be an integral part of it. I don't know if that's happening. I'm not saying it isn't. I don't know if it's happening.
I watched some, this was a while ago, but I watched some show that talked about the crime, the way the gang violence used to be in Compton in LA, which, you know, it's also a big city, so clearly similar type of problems. And the people that used to be involved in trying to keep that down were complaining about how much more difficult it is to police the violence that escalates on the internet and plays out in the street than in the 70s or 80s, whenever the Compton situation was really at its worst, where they would really like just hang out on the street and try to squash the beef, as they called it, as it happened. Now with like Facebook, this is all escalating, and then somebody checks in on Facebook somewhere and somebody else drives up and shoots up a party. It's much harder for people to keep track of. And consequently, some of the mayoral candidates in Chicago are talking about establishing like a police division that would focus solely on social media as a way of trying to keep crime down. And I don't think it's a bad idea. I mean, it hasn't been tried yet, so maybe it will fail, but it's an attempt.
I don't doubt that. I mean, not just social media, but the internet in general has, even in nonviolent situations, you got people that just post shit or make shit up. That's just completely bullshit. And, there's a sucker born every minute. So somebody's going to buy into it. And you're correct. And it doesn't just have to be Instagram or TikTok or Facebook or whatever. There's private forums. There's Zoom now where people can, or, Zoom or Zoom-like products where, people can get together and plot stuff totally, uncensored and unsupervised. And it's, so for crime, to me, there's just going to have to be some answers. Go ahead. Take it easy, Eddie.
Might not be bad.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, kind of to your point about the Facebook, another
Thanks for everything, buddy.
dimension I heard about was that, obviously there's a lot about reputation and saving face with the gangs and stuff. And it used to be, now with Facebook, if someone posts something about someone else, something insulting or something threatening, it's out there for everybody to see, and it's stuck out there. So you can't let a slight go, so if someone insults you online, you have to respond to that. That they're saying that changed the dynamic where before, when things were rumors or someone thought they heard someone say something, it didn't necessarily demand a direct response. But now when you do it online, it's concrete, and it almost, exacerbates the situation with a lot of the gangs.
Well, in my day and age, that was the thing. There used to be an expression, you don't you don't put your shit out on the street, right? If you had something to say to someone, you had to find that person. If you started talking shit about someone, it will get to the person and you will be confronted. Okay. So this is not a new phenomenon. But yes, what you're saying, because it's on Facebook or whatever, on the internet, I should say. Yeah, now, oh, well, they can't let it pass. And since they publicly insulted you, you have to publicly retaliate. All right. Whereas back in my day, if somebody privately insulted you, then you privately dealt with it. Okay. The whole world didn't have to know. As a matter of fact, you didn't want the whole world to know, because that would mean Johnny Law would know. So yeah, it's yeah, and it's hard for us because we're actually using social media, or we're using the internet to reach a market of people here. And I do believe the internet can have a lot of good, but I don't think it's turned out the way they initially thought it was going to turn out with the internet.
Well, I think people are just naive. I don't know. It's kind of funny because I remember, I don't know, it was early 2000s or whatever, they were talking about like the democratization of the news and how now that everybody has a camera phone, we're going to get all this information, and just the preponderance of information is going to be good for people. But, any tool, I don't care if it's a knife or a hammer or the internet, can be used to build something constructive or can be used as a weapon. And you got to remember that. So yeah, I mean, social media is not, I'm definitely not saying the solution is to get rid of social media or to lock it down. A, that can't happen. But B, just be, also educate people. I mean, you just think about all the misinformation out there and how easy it is to deceive people, and how, it's such a powerful tool for foreign governments to come and mess directly with people. I mean, it's a super strong propaganda tool. Literally people around the world are governments, from inside their borders can reach out to people's phones, anywhere in the world now, and give them whatever message they want to give them. So it's very powerful for both good and evil. And I think it's, I mean, in that realm, as far as the misinformation, it's just we're gonna have to educate our people about how to be smart about what you're looking at and reading, and
Well,
try
too
not
much
to be manipulated.
The thing is, with any subject, anything ever, too much information too quickly, it's like drowning. It's like too much water too quickly. It's gonna kill you. So people don't, that's the problem with the internet. You can get all this information, even if it was 100% accurate, which it really isn't. But you can't retain, you can't absorb, you can't think, and make a concrete example out of it, because it just keeps coming at you. It's like a barrage. And I think people have to be trained, I really do, to learn to take it in real tiny bite-sized stuff, and as opposed to just getting it, like, even like one of the years ago, when I would do seminars back in the 90s, I wanted to show everybody all the great techniques that we have to offer that others didn't have. And in a way, it was too much information. People are like, man, great seminar, but man, I don't remember half the shit. It was too much. So you have to slow it down and not, just, shoot things out from all angles, so to speak. So yeah, I think that's the issue with the internet, especially. And I tell people who are training with me or interested in training, look, quit looking at all these damn YouTube videos, okay? Because you're just going to get inundated with shit, and it's going to be, you're not going to get that clarity. So, that's just the way it is.
Hey, Martin, so what towns were you in Poland? I think you mentioned them, because the other thing I was curious about is, do we know what town Radvan came from?
I thought it was Poznan.
I've never really been to Poznan. I've been to Gdańsk on this trip, which, like I said, was one of those casualties of World War II, and Warsaw. But some of these guys came from really small towns. I don't know, like if Radvan came from Poznan, that's a big town.
Well, he may have come from a suburb, is what I mean.
Yeah, or some village near Poznan.
Yeah.
Because I looked up Zabisco, and he came from some little nothing town. Like it's not even worth visiting, because I'm sure whatever his, legacy was in that town it was negligible. So it's not like these people were feted in any way, because it's kind of like retroactive. Like maybe there is now a body of work that should be um, turned into like a museum somewhere, but that wouldn't go in where they were born, because they did not much there. Their body of work was accumulated somewhere else. I'm sure. Like I think Tony mentioned this before. Like Radvan was well known in Cleveland. He's probably completely unknown in his hometown.
Well, there was the Chicago Polish Museum here. And when my old accordion teacher, Ronnie Moon, moved to Chicago for a while, when I helped him move out here, because he knew Radvan, we went to or he called the museum, or we went to the museum. I don't remember. I think he called them. They never heard of Radvan. Hell, half of Cleveland didn't know Radvan. It was just that section, of Cleveland that knew him. And that, there was other strong men. There was a guy named Peter Zebich, who I think was a Serbo-Crow from somewhere in Pennsylvania, but he used to come through Cleveland with his liniments, snake oil salesman, handlebar mustache. He predated Stanley Radvan, but there was that section of East Side Cleveland, like basically, where I learned to box and all that. I showed Joe the Slovenian section, in essence, the Slovenian Croatian. They thought, Zebich was the strongest man, and the Polish thought Radvan was the strongest man of all time. And there was another strong man even before that in Cleveland from the late 1800s. I do not recall his name. At one point, I was at some secondhand book place. This was before it was like a fair, Renaissance kind of fair. They had this big poster and shit. Well, I had run out of money. I bought all these books. I couldn't buy the poster of this Cleveland strongman. I wish I had that. And then you had Tom Jenkins, one of the greatest wrestlers of all time, catch wrestlers ever from Cleveland, just outside of Cleveland. One-eyed, he was a steel mill worker. Nobody in Cleveland's heard of Tom Jenkins. He ended up being a coach at West Point for 30 years or whatever, wrestling coach. So, yeah, I agree with Martin that what's popular to us, we're still a small little section of the world. We're like a fringe. So, yeah, you're not going to see much. I think they got a little statue or a plaque in Neenah, Wisconsin. I believe somebody told me. I think Craig Goss told me of Ed Strangler Lewis, because he was from up there, somewhere near the Wisconsin Rapids. But Ed Strangler Lewis was more popular than Zbyszko, more popular than Radvan, because he was actually on television and he was champion of the world, after Zbyszko, and was a much superior wrestler than Zbyszko. So yeah, who knows? I mean, I'm just wondering if is Downers Grove, is Lombard going to put up a statue of you, Joe?
I'm definitely
Maybe New
working on
Jersey
it.
will.
Yeah.
For all
he
your New
hates-
Jersey exploits.
This guy bashed Philadelphia on the podcast a 3 years ago. Like,
Now, see, this goes back to disinformation. This is exactly, thank you for making my point about don't trust everything you hear on the internet.
yeah,
I actually like Philadelphia quite a bit. Now, I didn't say great things about Camden on the other side of the bridge there. I had to make quick my escape from there, but Philadelphia, I would go back in a heartbeat. I like that town quite a bit. I went with Dwayne and my buddy Will. So I've been back there multiple times. Now, do I think that the Philadelphia cheesesteak is inferior to the Chicago Italian beef? Yes, I do. But it doesn't mean I don't like it. I mean, maybe I won't put cheese whiz on it like they some reason do. I can't explain that, but great town. I loved it. Both Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. I had a great time on both of those and I'd go back. Yeah, definitely. That's another town where I just wish I could spend, at least a couple of weeks exploring all the neighborhoods and stuff, but I've had great times at both places.
yeah, it's the heartland of, it really is, because I know people like to say such and such farming community is the heartland, but it really isn't. I mean, everything sprung from the major cities throughout history. Martin and I were talking about this. You're back to Egyptian times, and before that, it was major epicenters, Rome, Warsaw, whatever. And then things satellite out from there. But yeah, Philadelphia, New York, Buffalo, Cleveland, Detroit, Chicago, other towns. I don't want to leave any other St. Louis, you name it. There's just been so much. And even down south, Atlanta, and on and on, there's a lot to see. And you didn't get a chance to see everything I wanted you to see in Cleveland. I knew you weren't going to, because we only had 3 days or whatever. So you can't do that here. Like even Scott doesn't get it, that he wants to go here, there in Chicago. You can't do that all in one day. Okay. You've got to spend, a week or two and get up at 6 a.m. and hit the road, and not get back till 11 o'clock at night or midnight. There's so much to see.
One other, example that I have is, and I think this goes back to the point where like all these great achievements can't be achieved like in a vacuum. You can't be just one person growing up in a nothing town, coming up with some great idea that then the world's going to adopt. And the point that I wanted to illustrate this with was Thomas Edison. His hometown is Milan, Ohio, which I've been to. It's a tiny little town. There's not much to it. It's near Cleveland, I suppose.
Yeah.
And they have like a little bit of his house where he was born. There's like a little bench you can sit on. But he did most of his work in New Jersey. I mean, that's kind of where he was. And he wasn't alone. There was other guys that were involved with him. In fact, one of his like assistants was like a black dude who like commercialized all his inventions. And that guy doesn't get enough credit because he stuck with Edison for a very long time and has a ton of patents, because like the stuff that Edison invented wasn't really like commercially usable. You needed to put it through another set of eyes and another set of attempts to really commercialize it. And you couldn't do that all in Milan, Ohio. It's just not enough of a town to support all those ideas that had to come together.
Well, no, you're correct. And this happens to be the case with pretty much everything. Even martial arts, and nobody created all of this stuff. They picked from other people, and it was a conglomeration of efforts. And there's also, independent discoveries. People think they've come up with something. They genuinely do. They may be 100% sincere. They think I just invented something. Well, not really, because somebody on the other side of the country already did that, right? So yeah, it's really fascinating that theory. Well, it's really not a theory. It's an absolute fact. But people get so invested in their belief systems, that they just kind of shut down they close their mind, and they're not open to other, possibilities. I've seen moves like martial art, Brazilian jiu-jitsu moves. Are like, well, I've done that when I was 15 years old. Okay. That's not a jiu-jitsu move. Joe Blow from, whatever gym did not invent that move. Okay. It's been around. So, that kind of shit. Nothing new.
But yeah, you definitely, I mean, I remember I read Steve Martin's autobiography, and one of the things he said, or his advice to comedians, was you have to go to where the action is. You could be the funniest person in the world, but if you stay in your little neck of the woods, you may never be discovered. You got to go to the big towns. You got to go to New York or LA or whatever to get discovered. And that kind of goes to your point about Radvan. I mean, here's this world-class talent who was only known locally there, and even though it was in a big town like Cleveland, it wasn't enough to give, for a lot of these people, you might have great ideas or great skills, but sometimes to get that out to the world, you've got to go to where people are
music
at.
Too. Every town, large town, even some smaller towns, have tremendous musicians that they don't want to leave the town for whatever reason. Like Jerry Sigler, greatest jazz accordionist I ever heard. Nobody knows him. Buddy Fight, who was a phenomenal guitarist. What's his name? Boy, when we get on these subjects and I can't think of names real quick. Johnny Costa. Okay. As good as Oscar Peterson and Errol Garner or Art Tatum, he's right there. He never wanted to leave Pittsburgh. He made his name with Mr. Rogers. He was the pianist behind Mr. Rogers, but that was filmed in Pittsburgh.
Huh.
He didn't want to travel. He didn't want to leave town. He was, Matter of fact, Art Tatum, the legend, the god, used to call Johnny Costa the white Art Tatum. I mean, the guy had technique. He was just amazing. Never left town. There was an accordionist that used to play with him as well, Dominic Tremarchi. Nobody heard of him. Matter of fact, Johnny Costa played the accordion. I never heard it, but I knew that he did. Yeah, so artists, same thing, painters, and there's probably so many worldwide that no one will ever know of that have every bit of ability. They can copy any known artist in the world. But yeah, it's a story that's old as the ages. Now imagine throughout history, some small town in the middle of Denmark who may have created, there may have been a person that lived there, male or female, that was just the greatest person in the world. Who knows? But lost to history, man, lost to antiquity.
I want to take a little turn, and I'll put you on the spot. And you maybe don't have to answer this today, but maybe it's like a research project for you, Tony. Maybe you know off the top of your head, but I'm sure there's not one source, but I'm always kind of impressed when I'm talking to you. You start name dropping all these great old time wrestlers. Was there like a couple particular books that you really, or was it just randomly that you picked up over your various study and research to find all these names? I mean, you really had a handle on what I would call, kind of the last era of catch wrestling and all those names out there.
I used to remember, I used to have all that records and all of that memorized. My memory's shot. So, well, the book that first got me started on strength, really, and it covered wrestling as well, was Super Athletes by David Willoughby. Okay, that's what got me. But then talking to Stanley Rodvan, because he knew Zbyszko, Vladik and Stanley Zbyszko, and others he knew, all the old timers and shit. So I got some firsthand knowledge from him. And but as far as books, not really. I mean, I've read books, don't get me wrong, but there really hasn't been anything, at least when I was growing up, there was nothing written that I was aware of. But I will tell you, there were some very gifted wrestlers that are sadly pretty much forgotten. And that's, and that's a shame. Not all of them were like submission giants. But like there was Henry Wittenberg, okay? He was probably one of the greatest wrestlers this country ever produced. He ended up becoming a New York City cop for years, an Olympian, champion, and all that, national champion. But when you're going to talk about pound for pound, the greatest wrestler of all time, I'm going to vote for Robin Reed. Not only did he also was a professional wrestler, small, like 130 some pounder, beat everybody, officially and unofficially. I'm talking even up to heavyweights. Okay. He was an Olympic gold medalist, absolute monster of a wrestler, lost to history. Most people never heard of him, but pound for pound, he was immensely talented. And there's just, I hate to start naming names, because then when you don't name somebody else, they'll be like, whoa, what does he think of that guy? But you're getting me off the top of my head. These were just guys that were, phenomenal. Toots Mott, another one who I know he had some heat with Fez, but I think much of that stemmed from the business side of it. Okay, because he became a promoter, but the professional wrestling you see nowadays wouldn't have existed if it wasn't for Toots Mott. And he knew submissions. Ray Steele, Pete Sauer, national champ, knew submissions. It goes on and on, but it's just a shame that so many are lost to antiquity, okay, so to speak. And I know stories that are so controversial. They're true stories, but they would bust people's dreams. And therefore, people can't have their dreams busted. So they're going to go on the attack. But there were a lot of wrestlers, famous wrestlers, that weren't really very good, or were workers, completely workers, that got put over as the legit people. And that's something. I mean, that's And I'm talking way back, turn of the 19th century and shit like that. Even in the late 1800s, same thing, you know. But let the people believe what they want, because it really doesn't affect us. You know, I know if I'm looking for, I used to tell people when they were asking me about these old time wrestling books, buy them for historical purposes only. Don't think you're going to find a move in there that's going to revolutionize the world. You won't. Okay. Just buy them for historical purposes. Like if you were buying a book from the 1700s that's written in Old English, just respect it for its historical place and time. You're not going to walk around talking like that. And some of the words have changed their meaning. So it's not going to be a functional thing. So that's how I tell people to approach a lot of history. Just look at it, not so much for functionality, but for, what's the word I'm thinking of? Like not reminiscing. I can't think of the
Like
word.
an artifact?
Nostalgic, you know.
Well, it gives you kind of a glimpse into the evolution of things too. See where things were at. But you're right, so many things are changed when they're written down. You know, you don't get the true story or whatever.
Oh, we're better athletes today. There's just no, I mean, not to say that those guys were chumps, but you know, there's literally no comparing the two. And we have an advantage because medicine has improved tremendously. So injuries in 1920 that would have ended your career are now like sidelining you for like 2 months, you know, then you're back in action. So we have benefits today that, you know, people, you know, 100 years ago just didn't have.
Yeah, and you just get the benefit of learning from the previous generation. You know, every generation is standing on the previous generation's accomplishments, and you can learn from them. So there's always you're always, you know, the direction of human accomplishment is always going to be, you know, but you're right. So it's kind of an unfair comparison.
Well, you know, like music. Okay. Now I'm a jazz guy and all that, but I'm a musician. You know, just I like I like a lot of variety of music. But you know, if I'm going to listen to, let's say, 1920 Bix Beiderbecke or Louis Armstrong or guys of that era, I can't do that all day and all night, okay? Because we've surpassed them both from a technical standpoint and a creative standpoint. But that only happened because of those guys, okay? And they learned their tricks and tips from a generation beforehand too, which all stemmed ultimately from, in this country, classical music and some influence of folk music. When you had the immigrants coming over with from wherever they were with their native folk music. And even in Poland, you have Chopin, who wrote polkas, and Italy made polkas and recorded or wrote polkas and mazurkas, and Slovenia and Croatia and all that, the tamburitsins, and all of it is just, and it becomes an amalgamation. And somewhere along the way, somebody just, well, I'm going to change a little thing here, and if you look further back, and even classics, there's some improvising in classical music. Of course, it's certainly not like the jazz guys, but and then you have your late 1800s, early 1900 composers, Rimsky-Korsakov or some others like that, that just pushed the envelope so much away from traditional classical oriented pieces such as Beethoven, Tchaikovsky, Haydn, to what became the outer limits of classical, to where the jazz guys started picking it up. And some of the more astute jazz, clinically trained jazz musicians, such as Buddy DeFranco and others, Red Rodney, Tommy Gumina, they started studying with these classical guys, Shostakovich, one of them, and they started implementing those theories into jazz. and started to get way out there, really creative shit, polytones, everything. I'm getting technical here, but all of it stemmed from something outside of their element. So they didn't go to previous jazz musicians alone. And that's how fighting has to be. You can't just, sometimes you got to go get out of the box, get out of that circle, start going to different styles or different cultures, or just sometimes watch a football game and see how the football player got that guy to the ground in a tackle, because in a real life fight, I remember, such and such did this. So get out of the wrestling element once in a blue moon and just see how the football player may have done it. I mean, I'm using that as an example, but that's how you got to start thinking. That's how musicians started to think too.
So you got any plans for the week, Tony? Doing some.
Scott's supposed to come over, the swimmer, and we're going to watch the fireworks show tonight. And there's a parade in in about another hour and 45 minutes. So I don't know if that police officer and his wife that I met at the seminar, I don't know if because they live on the other side of the lake. I don't know if they're coming to my house. They were supposed to come over tonight to watch the fireworks, but they got tickets to the ZZ Top concert tonight. So they're going to ZZ Top. So I don't know if they're coming over or not, but I'm just staying home unless I run to go get a sandwich or something. But yeah, I'm just going to chill out. What about you two guys?
Well, the only thing I do basically is after this podcast is over, I shut everything down and then I just go sit in my room and wait for the next podcast. So basically I just get enough food stored up so I can make sure I can survive to the next time I can record with you, Tony.
In front of a mirror, though. You're in the front of a mirror at all times, right?
No, the lights are off completely. I mean, it is mirrored completely. Yeah,
Yeah.
of course.
That's
But no, I
awesome.
just sit in the dark and wait for this podcast to happen. So that's the business as usual, I guess.
So you're like a mushroom in essence.
Yeah. And I don't know if I'm one of the poisonous kinds or not, but
Well, what about Martin? What are you going to do, Martin?
I'm gonna go to like a fireworks display in some suburb because I got kids and I pretty much work for my kids with no
Well,
pay, by the way, and no benefits.
Martin had his
Free labor.
almost hour and a half of his personal Zoom training today before we filmed the Zoom meeting. I put him through a good workout. So he's fit. So he's going to go for a 12, 15-mile bike ride. Yeah, you're in good shape.
Yeah, that Zoom session is my fun for the weekend, Tony. That's basically all I get. And then it's basically kind of like Joe being a mushroom and at my kids' call.
Well, I want to wish everybody a happy 4th. And for those of you who aren't in this country, just enjoy the weather or the weekend. And, thanks everybody for tuning into this podcast. And hey, we'll see you next week. I don't know. I guess Joe's not going to be here, but I'll do a podcast with Martin or somebody. If I have to do it alone, I'll do it alone. But everybody, thanks again. Joe?
happy 4th, everybody. See y'all later.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.